Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to episode 42 of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray, and today is the first day of June. So, wow, it's exciting to get around to June now as we started this project in last November. And so things are moving right along, and we really appreciate you guys tuning in with us as we've gone to 3 episodes a week now. We've done it for, I guess, maybe a month and a half now. Would love to hear your feedback. Are you enjoying the 3 episodes a week format? Or would you say, hey, Ryan, go back to 1. 1 was plenty. We got enough there. Or let me know. Also, if you haven't noticed, we're kind of balancing out our guests. We're saying we've got renewables, we've got oil and gas, we've got reporters, we've got authors, we've got a wide range of guests. And we're doing that to really find out what our audience wants to hear. So today's the first day of June. It's a new month. We'd love to hear from you today to let us know how can we improve this show for our listeners. You can always reach me at globalenergymedia.com/contact. Use the contact form, and I will get that email. And on today's episode, we bring on Brian Mitchell. Really enjoyed this conversation. He's been in the industry since, the oil and gas industry, that is, since 1983. Kind of been all over the place. We talk about mainly drilling in the oil and gas industry. So a lot of insight from Brian, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Brian, thanks for coming on. How's it going today?
It's going very well. How about you, Ryan?
Doing well. So let's get into it. You've been in the business since 1983, if I'm correct, and you've kind of worked all over. Kind of give us just a 30,000-foot view of your career, and where all have you worked at, and what all have you done?
Okay. My oil field career started in western Colorado in Piceance Basin. A small company came in and developed a field in our area where my folks were ranching, and I started out as a roustabout and a backup pumper. Grew from that to company man, kind of by accident, just being the one guy with the fax machine in the area. And beyond that, I've been field superintendent, worked just about every position on a rig, and have been a company man in a number of different states. So kind of hard to sum it all up in just a few words. So.
No, I understand that. Now, one of the things we were talking about offline here is you've kind of worked all over the country. Let's kind of break it down and say, okay, what are the differences that you're looking at from a drilling side in these different plays? You know, if you talk about the Permian or the Marcellus or any of them, what's the differences and why do we, the depths and what all is involved with drilling in these different basins that maybe just the normal listener wouldn't go, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize that if you're drilling the Permian, you got to do X, Y, and Z compared to the Marcellus or the Utica?
A lot of it will be state regulation involved. For example, if you get into Texas, they still allow for reserve pits. Other places, it is exclusively closed-loop drilling. So your management in terms of your cuttings and how you handle your fluids is one of the primary differences. What I've found is similarities in a lot of basins. For example, we'll deal with what we call a red marker in Colorado. You'll have the same sort of geologic formation in Permian and other basins. In West Virginia, they called it red rock, and it was something to be dreaded. Basically, what it was an expanding shale. If you had too much fluids getting into it, then you had drilling problems. What had been solved, an issue that had been solved in a lot of the basins I work in, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Texas, New Mexico, was a major problem in the Marcellus, and really it was something that the solutions had come from other basins. So it was nice to be able to present those solutions and solve some problems in the Marcellus. So.
Now, one of the things you do see, though, is you go from different basins is the depth difference. And how does that affect if you're going out there to drill a well, if you're doing, you're drilling the Marcellus and maybe a shallower well, if you're going to somewhere else, maybe a deeper well, how does that go into your playing, into your planning, into your logistics and all the other stuff that's involved with drilling well?
Yeah, as you get into deeper wells, you have to have a much bigger rig. You've got to have better pump capacity, those sorts of things. So a lot of those logistics are more or less taken care of by the engineering ahead of time, well ahead of when a company man gets on location. One of the biggest things that you have to be concerned about is differences in formation pressures. What's going to produce a kick in one area may not be visible or something that you would encounter in another basin at the same depths. Under pressure and overpressure zones, depleted zones, a lot of those things you run into in more established fields. And, of course, those are challenges that increase with depth. When you get into an area like the Marcellus, they'll drill as far as 9,000 feet on, say, a vertical section of a well with air. And so you have no drilling fluids involved there, whereas in other areas, everything is drilled with fluid. And so being able to balance those two different things and the strengths of each, you also get into some areas where you can't drill surface without aeration in your fluids. So a lot of different things that you can encounter just from basin to basin.
When we talk about depth, the different depths for the wells, how much time are we looking at to drill maybe a Marcellus well to maybe an Eagle Ford well, or pick any two basins you want? And just when you look at these deeper wells, how much actual more drilling time is involved to drill that out?
In the case of the Marcellus, which is probably my most recent experience, I have done some more work in the Piceance Basin in western Colorado since, but what we look at in Marcellus is we were around 6.5 days or so to drill about 9,000 feet vertical. Then surface rigs would move off and a horizontal rig would move in, complete up to 13,000 foot lateral in around 14 to 18 days. So total drilling time of just about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks at most. Get into an area like the Piceance Basin, a little less, not necessarily doing extended reach or horizontal drilling there, but you would drill a 9,500 foot well in, this would be going from spud to TD cemented in about 6 days now. In 2005, those same wells in the Piceance Basin were taking an average of 28 days. So with the improvement in drill bits, mud motors, and other top drive technology, those sorts of things, drilling time has dropped down. It'll get to a point, I'm sure you can't drill much faster, but a lot also depends on the type of rig that you're on. Right now, H&P probably has the most productive rigs in the industry, but there are a lot of other companies that aren't as big or as prominent as H&P that have just as productive rigs.
Okay, so you said it was about 6 to 7 days to drill down and about 14 to 18 to drill horizontally. So about 2 to 3 times as long in the Marcellus to drill horizontally as it does vertical. Is that kind of a normal ratio, or is that just unique to the Marcellus?
That's a fairly typical ratio for the Marcellus. Just in general, there are sweet spots in every play, of course, but just a general average, that seems to be what you would see most in the Marcellus.
Okay. Well, let's transition here a little bit. You've worked in the business for a long time, and one of the things that I always talk about from the oil and gas standpoint is, we want to be out there as oil and gas professionals talking about the environment. We talk about safety, and we want to do this because we want, there's kind of a perception that people in the industry don't necessarily care about this type of stuff, and that's just not true. When you get in the industry, you start meeting folks in the industry, you find out very quickly that there's a lot of people who care about the environment and they care about safety. You've been in since 1983. What are some of the biggest changes in safety that you have seen in that time period?
One of the biggest things is probably the increase in the use of automation. And by automation, I mean things like an iron roughneck. When I worked for Enzyme, we had automated drill rigs that used an iron derrick hand. So basically your derrick hand didn't have to climb to the derrick to trip pipe. But the biggest change is in handling tubulars. You'll have a pipe wrangler or a pipe handler that'll bring pipe to the floor rather than using chains as we did in the past, and a tugger or a winch to bring pipe to the floor. So biggest change is probably the elimination of manpower handling tubulars. Another thing, too, is common technology, I guess, but was added to the oil field is the use of forklifts. When I first started working on a rig, you didn't do anything, didn't even have a forklift on location. Now virtually every location has a forklift or two, and man lifts and all kinds of different things that we didn't have in the past. But the future of the industry, it looks like, too, is moving towards more and more automation to the point where if a rig hand can be eliminated in any situation, any hazardous situation, and put behind a protective wall or just out of the way of moving iron, that seems to be the trend in the future for sure.
One of the things that I thought about when you're talking about the changes in safety is we often think of safety, especially for oil and gas, as deaths. And obviously we don't want anybody to die on the rig or on a pipeline or in a facility. But a lot of the things you described there, obviously they can prevent deaths, but they can also prevent minor injuries, such as broken hands, legs, feet, stuff like that. And that's one of the things that kind of gets lost in this discussion is that as we become more efficient and more safe, that even the smaller injuries are becoming less and less, it seems to me. Would you agree with that kind of synopsis?
Yes, I would absolutely agree. It was about 10 years ago, I think, the leading cause in related to rig operations was driving to and from the rig. And in about, I'm going to say about 5 years ago, the IADC reported that the leading cause of death and injury on a rig was heart attack and stroke. So the actual operations on a rig have gotten safer for sure. And the elimination of the smaller injuries, the ones that can cost a guy a finger, cost a guy a hand or use of a hand, a lot of those things have been, we've just made developments and strides, a lot of awareness and a lot of corrections to avoid those types of injuries that are also life-changing.
Absolutely, and obviously losing a finger isn't nearly on the same scale as losing your life, but one of the things that you see with safety is that if you know that yesterday Bob lost his finger on an accident, well, guess what? All of a sudden that you're going to be a little bit more tense than you need to be. You're going to be a little bit more aware, too, and you're going to be a little bit more safe. You're going to be a little bit more safety aware, but you're going to be a little bit more tense. You're not going to work normally, and so sometimes that can actually have a reverse effect of what you want, where accidents happen because you're almost kind of hyped up. You're kind of nervous, and you don't feel like you can actually perform your job at the right task. And so I've kind of seen it go both ways. Just after an injury, all of a sudden the pendulum was swung and no one can really function, and that can be just as dangerous because now you're working in a state that you're not used to working in. So safety, even for these small things, I think is something that we want to make sure that we're bringing attention to, and that we want to protect the fingers. As insignificant as that is compared to death, it does have, I think, repercussions for the potential for bigger injuries.
Absolutely, and one of the most interesting situations I've found myself in is on Friday the 13th. There's a lot of humor as you do your safety meeting in the morning. You have one incident during the day, and then that sort of paralysis that you were talking about sets in. So that over-awareness of a particular situation and a lack of situational awareness that's in front of you or present at that time that distraction can be even more harmful than the incident that happened before.
Yeah, it's a fine line because you don't want to say, "Hey, let's not be safe," and you don't want to say, "Hey, let's be too safe." It's kind of one of those weird situations that I can think of a few times where people have been injured, not necessarily directly on the project that we were on, but maybe on a different part of the project, and you kind of hear about it, and you're like, "Oh, wow, I didn't," and so it just kind of shifts your whole focus, and you're not really sure what to do because you've been trained to react to stuff in a certain way. So then the safety guy comes in and has to kind of help you get through it. So now, one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago was the automation of the rig, and there's been a lot of discussion of this, especially with technology and the push for technology that's actually finally invading the oil and gas market. As someone who's worked on a rig, do you see this as a good thing, or are you kind of concerned going, "Oh my gosh, this is kind of how I make my bread and butter. This might hurt me in the long run"?
Well, I think it's something that's going to happen no matter what we think about it. No, let's see, what was it, 2014, I believe it was, at Chesapeake, and NOMAC did a test trial run with a fully automated rig where basically every drilling decision was made by a computer, and all the driller did was monitor operations and control the rig during tripping and casing operations. The well that they drilled, the trial well, was very successful, took about 20% less time. When you have situations like Macondo where human error was really the source of the whole incident there, the move towards automation and kind of remote monitoring of the well drilling from an engineering staff in an office in Houston or Pittsburgh or elsewhere is probably going to become more and more common. Just the whole aspect that a human being and the skilled operator is going to be kind of taking a backseat, maybe even leaving the oil field to more of a technician-based operation is kind of frustrating to me because I've been around some of the legacies, the guys who've made the industry what it is today, and it comes down to that personality and that knowledge and that skill and ability level. But those things are going to change. I mean, even in directional drilling, you can have a highly skilled directional driller make your rig very successful. Now they've got automation that'll be coming in that will take that person out of the loop too, to where basically you just have a guy who makes up the tools and makes sure everything keeps working. So seeing the human end of things become less and less or decline as important in the industry is a little concerning to me. But I also know that the trend is towards automation for safety and higher production, and essentially the economic life of the oil industry to keep us going.
Yeah, and you're right there. It doesn't really matter what me or you think that it's going to go where it's going to go. The market will determine, what's the best thing for the market. And so it's really not. It really, no matter what we think about it, doesn't really matter. But it is important to kind of get this message out here, because younger people who might be coming into the industry going, okay, well, I want to come in. I want to be a driller. I want to work on a rig. You might want to step back and say, okay, well, let's step back here for a second. Let's look at how can you be a part of the automated drilling process. Can you go and build maybe the machinery that for these rigs? Can you go learn how to be the technician who's running the rig? Where do you fit in along that kind of piece of the puzzle? Because someone like yourself, who's been in the industry since '83, well, you have a lot of knowledge. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of opportunities consulting and still using rigs, obviously, for the rest of your career. But someone that's maybe in their 18, 19, 20, just out of high school, by the time they get to be their 40s or 50s, they might be looking at the paradigm going, oof, I may not want to jump in both feet to just strictly being a rig hand, so to speak. So it's an interesting time for the oil and gas industry, because you're seeing a lot of, they've historically been kind of criticized for not adopting technology, and now you're seeing technologies coming from everywhere. So I'm curious to see how long this trend keeps up, and how much technology really will invade the oil and gas space. So one final thing for you, because you have worked since '83, one of the toughest things about the oil and gas industry is you have to travel. Rarely are you lucky to be born in Midland or Odessa, Texas, and you grow up in the Permian Basin and you never have to leave your home. Okay, most of us, like I'm from Northeast Louisiana, so most of the work I've ever done before I moved to Texas was in Texas or North Dakota or Western Louisiana, but rarely do we have a project near the house, which means you have to travel. So how have you dealt with that? What have you learned, and what's some lessons that you could give to younger people saying, hey, if you're going to get in the oil and gas field, you're probably going to travel some. Here's what I'd recommend that you do.
One thing, I guess, is just if you're a natural tourist, it works really well. You'll see things that you would never plan to travel to see. As far as balancing that with home life, rotational schedules are awesome. You can work for 2 weeks, and then you've got 2 weeks to do whatever you want with what you've earned. If you have a family, though, it's real important that you and your spouse have an understanding and a plan in terms of dealing with that absence, being away from home and being involved in that travel. One key that I found is to speak with my wife every day by cell phone. We'll speak anywhere from 2 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on what we need to talk about. But we always talk to each other each day when I'm on the road. Text messages and emails just don't quite get it done like a communication like that. But as far as travel goes, if you're adaptable, you'll be in a lot of different situations where opportunities will present themselves. You'll have an opportunity to learn more about different basins, and like what I've done, take that to the next basin and be able to apply it successfully there.
Okay, and finally, we had a guest on the other day who talked about this, about OilPro. I know that you're into OilPro. It's something that I haven't personally gotten into yet, but I think I'm going to have to. Kind of give me the overview of why you're into OilPro, and what are some of the things that you enjoy about it?
For me, OilPro has just been a pure kind of an oil field or energy-related website. If you get into LinkedIn, there's a lot of distracting things. You'll get an email alert, 5 ways to land your next job, and it'll all be about a marketing executive. OilPro is pretty pure in terms of related to the industry, whether it's oil, gas, or even discussions regarding solar and wind power come up there. But it seems to be fairly well balanced. I think there's a higher level of professionalism that you'll find there, not the level of trolling that you can find in a lot of other sites, but the ability to interact directly with other professionals in the industry is probably the greatest strength of OilPro for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had on Tom Kirkman for episode 40, and he's, I know, a moderator on OilPro, and I think I don't know how much in the U.S. stuff he gets into. I know he's based out of Malaysia, so that's kind of his area that he deals with. But anyways, look, before we let you go, Brian, is there anything else that you want to plug or promote, or any way people can get in contact with you?
I would think the best way to get in contact with me is to connect with me on oilpro.com. Pretty easy to look people up there, other professionals. And I would say that the oil industry is one of the most dynamic you'll ever find on earth. If you're an environmental sciences major in college, if you want to get the best job where you can impact the environment, actually impact the environment, oil and gas industry is a place that has the finances, the resources, and the will to do that. The oil industry, for me, has given me the opportunity to learn something every single day. You're dealing with every kind of science, from physics to meteorology to drilling fluids, chemistry, you name it, whatever you want to deal with. The oil field has the opportunity to deal with those things. So for me, very dynamic industry, an excellent place to expand to your ultimate potential and to accomplish some incredible things with some of the most incredible people on earth.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on, and we will link to your profile in oilpro.com at the show notes, which is at globalenergymedia.com. You can find all the podcasts there and all the show notes, and people can look you up on OilPro and connect with you there. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure. Thanks for the overview. Enjoyed the content.
Oh, absolutely. It was my pleasure too, Ryan.
Thanks again to Brian for coming on. It's interesting as we talk about technology, and we've talked about technology on this podcast several times now. Where will it go? As energy professionals, we want to be efficient. We want to be on the cutting edge. And then you look at it and you say, well, does that kill jobs? And maybe it does. Obviously, in this case, if the automated drilling rig takes over jobs, then that's jobs lost. But it also creates new jobs, right? So there's people who had to build these new rigs that have new technology. So we always had to sit back and balance it out and figure out, how do we advise people on their career paths, and how do we advise our clients, on adding these new rigs and what would it look like for their company moving forward. Hope you enjoyed our discussion with Brian today. And as always, you can check out all of the information, including links to how to contact Brian, in the show notes page at globalenergymedia.com. The Global Energy Leaders Podcast is produced by Michael Sims and Chris Prine. Chris Prine also serves as editor for the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.